Okay, so we're doing Shagged. We're going to do Simonim, Pei Gimel, Pei Dalid, Pei Hey, and Pei Vav all together. It's really all one topic. So you're not going to see in the presentation of this year the division between those Simonim. If you really want to know, basically everything is Simon Pei Gimel, and like the last point is 2 points, or the rest of the Simonim. But we're going to do it all together. It's probably going to take 2 shir to get through these 4 Simonim. So we'll start. That way we don't have to rush. Especially this particular topic I don't know if it's more difficult than other topics we've done, but it's not a simple one. So I'll try to take it slow and clear. The question that the Shagged is dealing with is, what is the status of chametz that you own, but it's not in your house? Are you over the Isser of Bal Yira, Bal Yamatzeh for that type of chametz? And I believe we mentioned at least some of the shitas before, and here we're going to go through it systematically. So we're going to deal with 3 shitos, which eventually we're going to see the Shagged is going to boil down to 2 shitas, and then he's going to obviously pick sides of one of them. So the first shita, we're just going to go through them very quickly what the 3 shitas are, and then we'll look at them more in depth. So the first shita we're going to see is the shita of the Gaonim, as the Rosh understands it, which is, if the person that I gave the chametz to takes responsibility for it, so then I, the owner of the chametz, am not chayiv. Right? So it's in, let's say, a guy's house, and that guy took responsibility for the chametz, so then I no longer have to worry about it. It's not my issue on Pesach, and I'm not over the Isser. That's the shita of the Gaonim. Then there's the shita of Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rosh, and they hold that there is an Isser to own chametz. It doesn't matter where it is, and it doesn't matter if someone took responsibility for it. It's my chametz, and therefore it doesn't matter where it is. There's an Isser of Bal Yira, Bal Yamatzeh on that chametz. And then the third shita is the shita of the Ran in the name of the Ramban, which is, if it's not in my property, so then there's no Isser. The Isser is only if it's my chametz in my property. And that's going to be the preferred shita of the Shagged, which I think we quoted before, and we'll see here why he holds that way. Okay, so the first thing we'll discuss is the shita of the Gaonim, which is brought in the Rosh, which is the first Maramakom. It's the Rosh Psachim, Parak Aleph, Os Dalid, and he says as follows: Yish min ha-Gaonim she'amru, Yisrael shehifkid chemso eitzel nachri, o eitzel Yisrael chaviro, that if you have a Jew that gives his chametz to a guy or to another Jew, v'kibil hanifkad alav achayis, and the person who accepted it to watch it also accepts responsibility for it, then hanifkad chayiv b'biro, the one who accepted to watch it is chayiv to destroy it, if he's a Jew. V'lo hamafkid, but not the person who deposited it, means not the owner. Afal pishu shalo, even though it's his, k'im she'einu b'rishuso, because it's not in his rishus. Vehiviu raya mimechilta, and the raya to the shita is a mechilta. Detani hasam, as it says over there, bibatechem lamenemer. Why does it say that you have to get rid of the chametz in your house? Lefisha nemar, since a pasuk earlier said, b'chol gvulecha, in all of your borders, shomei ani kipshuta, I would think that's kapashtus, as long as it's in my property, so then I have to, or my gvul, I guess gvul means like a boundary of, maybe we would say any chametz that's in the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael should be aser. Ta'amlom b'batechem, therefore it says it has to be in your house. Ma beischa b'rishoscha, af gvulcha b'rishoscha. Just like your house, it's in your domain. So also when it says the word gavulch in the pasuk, it means something that's in your domain. Yatsa chemsu shel nachri b'rishus Yisrael, shehu bebeso ve'im yachol avaro. So we're going to exclude a case of a guy's chametz, which is in the Yisrael's property. So that's, even though it's in his house, he doesn't have to destroy it. It says here, he can't destroy it, it doesn't belong to him. Yatsa chemsu shel Yisrael b'rishus hanachri, it also excludes the chametz of a Jew that's in the house of a guy, Shu shalo, even though it's his, ve'im b'rishuso, it's not in his property. So that's the mechilta. And what the way the Rosh understands it is that the Gaonim specifically said, if you look up at the second line, It said, "V'kibil hanifkad alav achrayus." We're talking about a case where the person who's watching it took responsibility. So only in that case, the Rosh understands, do the Gaonim hold that the owner is potter. But if the person who's watching it didn't take any responsibility, just in his house, so then it would seem that the Rosh understands that the Gaonim would agree that that would be problematic. However, the Shagas Aryeh disagrees with this understanding of the Gaonim, and he says really the Gaonim hold like what we quoted above in the name of the Ran and the name of the Ramban, is that as long as it's not in your house, so then you're not over the Isser Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh. It has nothing to do with whether the owner of the house took responsibility for the chametz or not. As long as it's not in my house, I'm not over the Isser. And he explains as follows. That which the Gaonim say, v'kibel hanifkad alav achrayus, that is talking about a case where the person watching it took responsibility, we need that detail only to make that person chayiv. Right, the one watching the chametz, if he took responsibility for the chametz, as we've seen in previous shiurim, then he has a chiyuv. He's going to be over this or bal yirah bal yimatzeh. And that's how he continues. V'kibel hanifkad alav achrayus, then hanifkad chayiv b'yuro. That which the owner is not chayiv has nothing to do with the kabbalas achrayus. And that's the continuation when it says, V'lo hamafkid, the one who deposited it, the owner is not chayiv, apapi shalo, and he explains why, kevan shein and shubrashuso, because it's not in his property. On that half of the statement, the Gaonim don't say anything about who took responsibility for the chametz, because it doesn't make a difference. As long as it's not in your house, you can't be over the Isser. That's one point that he makes. The second point that he makes is that the Mechilta itself, that we quoted as the source for this Shita, didn't say anything about taking a chrayas. It just was speaking about whose property the chametz is in. So we see from there there's also no difference of whether a chrayas was taken or not. The Mechilta also mentions two dinim. It said, Yatza chemso shel nachri b'shus Yisrael, that the chametz of a guy in the house of the Yid, the Jewish person that does not have to destroy it, and also excluding the chametz of a Jew that's in the house of a guy. Now the first case has to be talking about a case where he did not take responsibility. Because we've said many times before, that the chametz of a guy in the house of a Jew, if the Jew took responsibility, he would be chayiv to destroy it. The Mechilta that says he doesn't have to destroy it has to be talking about a case where he didn't take responsibility. So it makes sense that also in the continuation, when we're talking about the chametz of a Jew in the house of a guy, also is a situation where he didn't take achrayus. So you can also just see from those two dinim put together, it seems that we're talking about where there was no achrayus taken. And a third point, the Shagas Aryeh points out, is just logically it doesn't seem that it should make a difference whether the owner of the house took responsibility. Because if the fact that it's not in my house doesn't help me as far as being over the Isser Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh by itself, then why does his responsibility absolve me of the Isser? It doesn't take it away from being mine, the fact that he has responsibility if he loses it, it's still 100% mine. So if the fact that it's mine and it's in his house doesn't help, then the fact that he has responsibility if it gets lost or stolen also shouldn't make a difference. So if we're going to pater him, if it's in the other person's house, it shouldn't make a difference whether or not there's a chrayas taken. And the last point that the Shagas Aryeh brings as a proof for his understanding is the question of Rabbeinu Yonah, which is the continuation of the Rush, brings this Rabbeinu Yonah from where we left off. And he says, Rabbeinu Yonah zal haya omer de la olam b'reshus hamafkidhu. Rabbeinu Yonah, he says, no, it's always in the reshus of the owner. The mafkid is the one who deposited it. So the owner is always in his reshus, even if it's not in his house. V'chayiv levaro min haTorah. A midaraisi has to destroy it. Kidarmina v'parak meruba, as we say in parak meruba, which is a parak in Bava Kama, v'goni mibeis ha'ish v'lo mibeis hektish. That the pasuk says that the person who stole from the house of the person, that excludes the house of hektish. Kach matzasi shim Rabbeinu Yonah zal. That's what I found in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah. V'lo havanti rayaso, but I don't understand his proof. Right? What does what we are talking about have anything to do with stealing from the house of a person? We'll just read this next line, even though it's not pertinent yet to our discussion. Also, Rabbeinu Yonah did not explain the mechilta that the Gaonim brought as a raya. So the Rosh doesn't understand Rabbeinu Yonah's question because the Rosh understands that the detail that we're discussing, the Shitas Gaonim, is whether the person took achrayus or he didn't take achrayus. We don't see anything about Beis Haganov, whether we're talking about a person that took achrayus or he didn't take achrayus. So we don't see how the Rabbeinu Yonah is discussing the opinion of the Gaonim. However, if you understand like the Shagas Aryeh, that the Gaonim are not discussing achrayus at all, they're just discussing whether it's in his house or not in his house, so then we can understand the question of Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is asking, when it says the house of the person by theft, it has nothing to do with the physical location of the item. A person that steals something, regardless of where it's located, is going to be chayiv, as long as it's in the house, meaning the ownership of a person, as opposed to being in the house, which means the ownership of hektish. Again, when it belongs to hektish, it doesn't make a difference where it is. If the thief steals it from a room in the Beis Hamikdash, or he steals it from someone's house, but he has something that's hektish, he's also not going to be chayiv. He was talking over there about kefil. So it has the same din. It doesn't make a difference what the house is. So therefore, when we use the word house in the psukim, says Rabbeinu Yonah, it doesn't make a difference whose house it is. It makes a difference who owns it. So therefore, the same thing with the chametz. It's not going to make a difference whose house the chametz is in. It makes a difference who owns it. That is a valid question against the Gaonim, according to the way the Shagas Aryeh understood it. The Gaonim want to say, if it's not in my house, I'm not chayiv for chametz. And the Rabbeinu Yonah is saying that we see it's not true. When it comes to theft, we use the word house, and it really makes no difference where it is. So we see from the question of Rabbeinu Yonah how Rabbeinu Yonah understood the Gaonim, and it's the same way that the Shagas Aryeh understood the Gaonim. So those are the 4 points that the Shagas Aryeh points out to prove that the Gaonim really hold like the Ran, which is that it doesn't make a difference whether there's a achrayus taken, whether there's any sort of responsibility taken by the watchman. It makes a difference whose house it's in. So we're left, according to the Shagas Aryeh, with really only 2 opinions. The sheet of the Gaonim, that is, if it's not in your house, you're potter, and the sheet of Rabbeinu Yonah, which we're going to see is the sheet of the Rosh, which holds that if it's not in your house, you're still chayiv. Okay, so now let's see the opinion of the Rosh himself, which is going to be the continuation of that Ma'ar Makom we're in the middle of, the end of Os Aleph and the Ma'ar Makomos, V'nir Li, it's the 4th to last line, V'nir Li de Davar Pashadhu, that it's very clear, the Afal Pidat Shan Nifgad Kibul of Achrayos, even if the house, the owner of the house that the chametz is in, took responsibility for the chametz, Mikol Makom Ikar Hamamun Shel Bailimhu. Still, the money, it still belongs to the owner. They came in Sheshilu Hanifgad Beso Lishmiras Mamono Kirina Bebeso. And another reason why he should be chayiv is since the watchman is letting the owner of the chametz use his house, so it's like the owner of the chametz is borrowing the house, so it's also called his house. And that which the Gaonim brought a mechilta, which seemed to explicitly say that if it's not in your house, you're potter, that's talking about a very specific case. It's only talking about where the guy lent the Yisrael money, and the Yisrael gave the object as a mashkon. And once it's a mashkon, so then, right, it's a whole different story, and the ownership in some ways transfers to the guy, as we're going to see actually inside an O space in the Ma'ar Makomos. Felt that was important to see the Gemara inside so we understand what the Rosh is talking about. So again, what we're coming now to explain is the Mechilta, which seemed to say if it's not in your house, you're potter. The Rosh is going to explain is really talking about the case that we're going to now see in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Aleph in Pesachim. So the Gemara says as follows: Itmar, we have a statement, Balchov, a creditor, Abayi Omar al-Mafreyahu Gova. Abayi holds his collection works retroactively. Rava Amar Mikanu Abahu Gova. Rava says that it works only from now on. What we're talking about is a mashkon, a collateral that was given for a loan. When the loan becomes due and the person doesn't pay up, and the lender now collects this object, from at what point is it considered as if he owned the object? Abayi says it's as if he owned it from the time of the loan, and Rava says it's as if he owns it from the time of collections, which of course can have a big nafkamina for Chametz and Pesach. if we're dealing with a guy and a yid. So Abaye says, or I'm skipping a little in the Gemara, which is one of the benefits of just printing out the parts that we need to see. Abaye Amar Lafrehu Gova. Abaye holds that it works retroactively. Kivin Damata Zmani V'Lopare, since the time comes and he hasn't paid yet, it shows us retroactively that it was always considered owned by the lender. V'shaper aktish v'shaper zavan, and therefore if he made it hektish or sold it in an interim, then that is a valid hektish or sale. Rava Amarava says, Mikanu Lavo Gov, it's only from the time of collection on. Since if the borrower had money, he would just give him money, and the object would remain in his possession. So it turns out that he's only collecting at this point. Tanan, the Gemara later on brings a question from the Mishnah, which says, Nachri shehilves Yisrael chemso achar Pesach muter bana, that if a guy lends a Jew money, and the Jew uses his chametz as collateral, so then after Pesach, that chametz is muter bana. So we see that on Pesach it was considered owned by the guy. So if we understand like Abaye, that the collection works retroactively, muter bahana. So then I understand why it's muter and hana. Because when the Jew does not pay back the loan, and the guy keeps the chametz, so we view it as if he owned the chametz all along. And the chametz of a guy, as we explained, is not asur after Pesach. Eli amrit mikanu habo gova. But if we hold like Rava, that the collection only works from this point on, amay muter bahana. Why should it be muter and hana? B'rshus Yisrael havakai. It was in the property of the Yisrael over Pesach, because the collection didn't happen until after Pesach. The Gemara answers, Hachamei askinan kishehirhinu etzlo. We're talking about a case where it was handed over to the guy. So nihi nami derhinu etzlo. So I understand it was handed over to the guy. Ha'amrit nachri mi Yisrael kani. We hold that a mashgon that was given from a Jew to a guy is not acquired by the guy. It's not considered actually his. So the answer is, look, Kash, it's not difficult. Hada amrli me akshav. Hada amrli me akshav. It depends whether he says from now or not. Because when he gives it over, he says, this will belong to you from now if I don't pay. So then, of course, even Rava would agree that he owns it from now if he doesn't pay. So that ends up neutralizing this whole machlokus of Rava and Abaye. If you would say it in this way, then of course everyone would agree that the guy owns it from the second that it's given to him, if that condition is fulfilled, which the case of the Mishnah is that it was. Okay, so therefore, what the Rosh is going to say is that the Mechilta also, which says if it's in the house of a guy, you're not over the Isser, is going to fit into this Gemara that according to Abaye, as long as he doesn't pay up the loan, then the guy owns it retroactively, and there's no Isser Bayir Bayimatzeh. And according to Rav, we're talking about a case where they spoke it out, that he owns it from the first moment, and that's why there's no Isser Bayir Bayimatzeh. But just stam putting your chametz in the house of a guy, right, that's not what the Mechilta is talking about, and you would be over the Isser for doing so, because it belongs to you, it doesn't belong to the guy. We're only talking about cases where it belongs to the guy. Okay, that's the way the Rosh is explaining the Mechilta. Now we're going to ask a couple questions on the Rosh, and then we'll move on to the Shita of the Ran. So one question is that his explanation of the Mechilta is very difficult. Why? Because the Mechilta learns its halacha from a pasuk. Right? Why does it say, Bateichem, your houses? It comes to teach us something. It's coming to teach us some sort of patur if it's not in your house. Now the way the Rosh understands that it's referring to specifically this case of where the Yisrael was borrowing money from the guy and he used the chametz as collateral, and according to Rava, he had to speak out that the kinyan works immediately. You don't need any drasha for that. It's all just based on logic. Abaye says that lemafrehu gova, that's the way it works. Anytime you have a loan, is the mashkon is considered acquired from the time of the original loan. And certainly according to Rava, where that's what you spoke out, that was the condition. So certainly he owns it from that time. So I don't need a pasuk of beischa to tell me it's nisr bali or bali matzeh. I just know that we're talking about chametz of a guy in the guy's house. Chametz of a guy in a guy's house certainly is no isser. I don't need a pasuk of beischa, of bateichem, in the Mechilta to teach us a din. So that's one question. Another question is that, as we pointed out, the Mechilta brings two cases that it says are patur. One is the chametz of a guy in the house of a Yisrael, and one is the chametz of Yisrael in the house of a guy. Now, if we're going to explain the chametz of Yisrael in the house of a guy is only going to be mutter in this specific case where there was a loan and they had a specific condition, according to Rav or according to Bayit, automatic, that the condition is that the lender owns the item from the time it was given over to him. So then how can we say that the chametz of a guy in the house of a yid is patur? If we're going to be talking about that same circumstance, where the guy is the one that borrowed the money, and he's now giving this as a collateral to the Yisrael with a specific condition or an implied condition whereby that it actually belongs to Yisrael on Pesach, so it belongs to Yisrael on Pesach, and it's in the house of Yisrael, so why would we be patur in that case? Alright, so the explanation of the Rosh seems to not fit into the Mechilta for those two reasons. The second question that the Shagas Aryeh asked on the Rosh is that which the Rosh said, his argument that if you are watching my chametz, so it's like you're lending me your house, right, for the chametz that's in it, my chametz that's in your house, you're lending me the house, and if you lend me the house, it's like it's my house, so it just doesn't work that way, la halacha. We hold that a rental is not considered the house of the one who's renting it. Certainly someone who's borrowing a house, it's not like the house of the person that's borrowing it. And most certainly in this case, I'm not even really borrowing the house. It's just that my object happens to be in your house. That's not going to make it like my house. So that, he doesn't like that argument at all. So therefore, because of these reasons, the Shagas Aryeh is going to end up siding with the Shita of the Ran, which is if it's not in your house, you're not over the Isser. Okay, so let's see the Shita of the Ran inside. And the truth is he's going to ask, we're not going to go through all of them tonight, I don't think, 5 questions on the Ran, but he's going to be able to answer up all those 5 questions, and therefore he's going to stick with the Ran. Okay, so let's see the Ran inside. It's a slightly lengthy Ran over here, but it's going to go through these different opinions that we've seen. It's going to speak about the Mechilta that we saw. Garsinan v'Gemara. We have a Gemara which says, Tanar Rabbanan, Nachri hanichnas l'chatzer shel Yisrael, ubatzeiku biyado, in zakuk levar. If a guy comes into the house of or the courtyard of a Yisrael, and he has dough in his hand, which is chametz, you don't have to get rid of it. It's not yours, you didn't take responsibility, so you're not responsible for destroying it. Hifkidu etzlo, but if the guy deposited it by the Yisrael, and now the Yisrael has to watch it, zakuk levar, so then you do have to get rid of it. Yichid lo bayis, but if you designate him a house, designate him a room, we spoke about this earlier, then ein zakuk levar, you don't have to destroy it. Shneimar, as the Pasuk says, lo yamatzeh, that chametz cannot be found by you. If you designate him a room, so it's not considered found by you. Upir Rashi zal. The way Rashi explains it, which is a little bit different than the way we've always discussed it, is that nachri shenichnas l'chatzer sheYisrael b'zeiku biyado ein zakuk levar shelo hiziku lahotzias anachri bein habayis. Bein habayis? I wrote bein habayis in my notes, but where the hell does it say it? Ein zakuk levar shelo hiziku lahotzias anachri min habayis, right? Okay. But you don't have to take him out of the house. Kida Amar, as we said, Aval Atavroa Shalchem, that you're allowed to see the chametz of someone else, meaning of a guy. That's Pasha. Now we're going to get to the part which is a little bit of Chiddush. If Kidu Etzlo Bistam, if he deposits it by the Yisrael without any conditions, Zakuk Levar, then he does have to get rid of it. Dekim Shekilu V'Shuso, if he accepted it into his property, Command Kabul Ayach Dami. So it says if he accepted responsibility for it, and we said if he accepts responsibility for the chametz of a guy, you do have to get rid of it. Where is it? K'aminon be Bava Kama. Kanos sharcha b'shusi chayev. As we say in Bava Kama, if someone says you can bring your bull into my property, so then you're chayev to watch it. Aval yichid lo bayis, but if you give him a special spot to put the chametz, then haveli command amar kanos sharcha b'shuscha. Then it's more like saying you could bring it in, with your own, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm taking no responsibility for it. So then he's going to be potter. Zeo derech Pirish Rashi's out. That's what Rashi explains. So according to Rashi, yichud lo bayis is just a way of showing that you're not taking responsibility. Right? If I say bring it in to my house, so I'm taking responsibility to watch it. If I say bring it in to this space which I'm designating for you, so then it's your responsibility. I'm not taking responsibility for it. That's the way Rashi explains. Rabbeinu Tam Zal Pirish, Rabbeinu Tam explains, which I think is the way we've explained it in previous shiurim. The B'Shekibel of Achrayis Haskinim, we're talking about a case where he explicitly took responsibility. V'afilu hachi, nevertheless, kim deyichelo bayis shari. Since he designated him a spot, so then it's mutter. Dahavali kemekabel Achrayis al chemso shel nachri, bebeso shel nachri deshari. Then it would be like accepting responsibility for the chametz of a guy in the house of a guy, which would be permitted. It's only a problem if I have a guy's chametz in my house. If I'm yichelo bayis, it's like it's in his house, right? Differently than Rashi explained. Rashi explained yichelo bayis changes my responsibility. And therefore it also is only going to work if that's the setup in the beginning. I'm telling him that I'm giving you a special spot in the house, so therefore I'm not taking responsibility for it. After I take responsibility, I can't fix that up by designating a spot for it because I already took responsibility for it. According to Rabbeinu Tam, no, designating a spot in the house, it helps even if you have responsibility for it. And therefore it could help even after you took responsibility for the chametz. As long as you now have a designated space for it, then it's considered like it's not in your house. That's the way Rabbeinu Tam says. And then here's the line where we start discussing, our specific topic. Shaharei, afilu chemso shel Yisrael, even the chametz of a Jew, kol shehu b'rishus hanachri, if it's in the house of a guy, eino over love. You're not over. So therefore, I can take the chametz of a guy that I took responsibility for and put it in his house or in this halachically created his house, right? A yichud lo bayis. I'm not going to be chayiv. Just if it was my chametz, I wouldn't be chayiv if it's in a guy's house. That's the line of the Ran, which is important, right? Because that's the machlokas we're discussing. My chametz in a guy's house, am I over the Isser? According to the Rosh, you are. According to the Ran, he's saying that you're not. V'hachi izim mechilta, Perek Zayin, and he's bringing the mechilta. The Tanya Hasam, the Brisa says there, B'chol gevulcha lama nemar. Why does it say B'chol gevulcha? L'fisha nemar b'teichem. Since it says in your house, Shomiani, I would think mashmo, it has to be specifically in your house. Tam lomer b'chol gevulcha. Therefore, anywhere in your property, it doesn't have to be specifically in your house. If you have chametz in your car, you're also over this. Imkain lama nemar b'teichem. So why does it say in your house? Lomer lach to teach us ma beischa b'rishuscha. Just like your house means it's in your rishus. So also anywhere in your borders, only if it's in your rishus. That excludes the chametz of a Yisrael if it's in the house of a guy. Even though he has the ability to burn it. But it's not in his rishus. So we see that the Ran also is bringing the mechilta, just like the Gaon did. He's passing also like this mechilta. If it's not in your house, you're not over the Isser. Umihu. However, this is important. Caveat. Hani mili midaraisa. Only on a diraisa level. Aval midrabanan chemza shel yisrael sheb'shus nachri tzarich bir. But midrabanan you do have to get rid of it, even if it's not in your house. Dahat shnan lekaman, because you have a mission later on. Aval nachri shel yisrael chemzo achar pesach over. If the guy lends money to the Yisrael, and he uses the Yisrael uses his chametz as collateral, so after Pesach he's over this. V'ukimna b'shirinu, and we say that it's talking about a case where he handed it over to the guy. V'hirhin bebeso shel nachri mashma. Hirhin means that it's in the house of the guy. Afilu hachi armina do over. We still say that he's over the Isser. Kilomer shu aser achar Pesach is going to be aser after Pesach. Hol v'avar, since he was over the Isser. Shelo biro, because he didn't destroy it. I assume what the Ran is talking about, right? We saw here in Etzlo is really he's potter. I assume the Ran is talking about a situation where the Yisrael actually redeems his chametz after Pesach. He doesn't default on the loan. In which case we said that whether it's a Bai or a Rabbah, it wouldn't have been under the ownership of the guy retroactively, because that only works if the Yisrael defaults on the loan. If he doesn't default on the loan, so then it goes back to Yisrael. But it wasn't in his house. Right? It wasn't in his house, so why should he be over the Isser? So the Ran says, it's only a D'Rabbanan. Looks like in my notes I'm skipping a little bit. Let's see how it works over here. Oh, I love view. Right, so I'm skipping a little bit down to where it says Vafilu Hafi, which is where? Here it is. 4 lines from the bottom, towards the beginning of the line. First line is midrabanan, few words in Vafilu Hafi. Nevertheless, Gabe Yichlo Bayis, when it comes to designating a house to the guy, Kaven Delav Yisraelhu, since it doesn't belong to the Yisrael, Ela de Pikadon, it's just a Pikadon by him. Afal Gav Shekibul Avachrayus Lo Echmir Lav Sheichayv Levar. Still, since he didn't take any responsibility, so therefore, even though he took responsibility, the Chazal were not machra on him to destroy it. Haramban Zal. So all of this was the sheet of the Ramban. So what he's saying now is, even though we just said that there is a Chiv D'Rabanan, even if it's not in my house, so if so, how does it help to yichid lo bayis, to designate a spot for the guy's chametz? If I took responsibility for the guy's chametz, therefore it's like it's mine, so how does designating a spot help me? There's still an issur d'Rabanan. On this we're saying that Chazal were not gozer. Chazal were only gozer if it's actually my chametz, and I put it in a guy's house, so then d'Rabanan, that's not good enough. But if it's a guy's chametz, I'm only chayiv because I took responsibility for it, so then if I put it in a guy's house, or yichid lo bayis, so then I'm potter completely, even on a d'Rabanan level. So that explains all these dinim. And then he brings the sheet to the Rambam. Aval Rambam zal kasav perik dal milchos chametz u'matzah she'yisol she'nifkid chemso is l'nachri over l'vay rabba matzah. But the Rambam holds that the chametz of Yisrael by a guy, you are over the Isser D'Oraisa. Right? So the Rambam is going to be like the Shita of the Rosh. But the Ran says he doesn't know where the Rambam gets this idea from. It could be that he's relying on that which it says that if a guy lends the Yisrael on the Yisrael's chametz after Pesach, he's over, which the Ran himself just above said that he's only over the Isser D'Rabanan. But it's not the Pashtus, right? You would think that he's over this or D'Oraisa, like all the other cases in the Gemara. So that's what the Rambam holds. But that doesn't seem to be correct. Because otherwise, why do we only talk about after Pesach, speak about the Isser Bal Yirah Bal Yamatzeh on Pesach? So therefore, the Ran doesn't go with the Rambam, he goes with the Ramban, that you're not over the Isser at all, at least on the D'Oraisa level, if it's not in your house. Now, the way we set it up was that the Ran holds if it's not in your house, you're not over this at all. However, it's important to note that there are those that explain the Ran similar to the way that the Rosh explained the Gonim. That the Ran is only talking about a case where the guy took responsibility to watch your chametz. Then, if it's both not in your house, plus the guy took responsibility, so then you're not over the Isser. But if you didn't take responsibility, you would be over the Isser even if it's not in your house. That's the way some explain the Shita of the Ran. However, the Shagat takes tremendous offense at that for many reasons. Number one is we already explained that we saw from the Mechilta that there's no difference. Right, from all the rayas that we brought before when we were discussing the sheet of the Gonim. So you saw in the Mechilta, we brought proofs from the 2 cases the Mechilta brought, plus from the fact that the Mechilta doesn't mention anything about Achrayas, that there's no difference. We also explained in Svara that there shouldn't be any difference. But besides for that, we can see from the words of the Ran himself, says the Shagas Aryeh, that he holds that there's no difference between whether you take Achrayas or not. We bring 3 proofs from the words of the Ran himself that it doesn't make a difference whether the guy took Achrayas. This is besides for the fact that the Ran didn't mention anything about Achrayas, besides for the fact that the Mechilta doesn't mention anything about Achrayas, besides for the fact that logically it shouldn't make any sense. So from the words of Ran himself, first, that which he brought this case as a raya to the words of the Rabbeinu Tam. So if you want to look at that again inside, that would be, if I could find it, Alpha Rabbeinu Tam is Al Pirish, is the 3rd wide line in the Ran. So he said that the Rabbeinu Tam explained, we're talking about he took Achrayas. Nevertheless, if you give the guy a special place in your house for his chametz, then you're not over the Isser. Because it's like you have, even though you have achrayas, but it's like it's in the house of a guy. And his proof to that is, because even the chametz of a Yisrael, if it's in the rishus of a guy, you're not over. Now, if the Ran is only going to be matter in that case where the achrayas is on the guy, how could he bring that as a proof to the din of Rabbeinu Tam where the achrayas is on the Yisrael? Right, the case of Rabbeinu Tam was the Yisrael is the one that has the responsibility, but since it's the house of a guy, he's potter. How can I say, and I have a proof from a case where the responsibility is on the guy? That doesn't seem to make any sense. He would have to be talking about a case where there is no responsibility on the guy, and I'm putting it in the guy's house. That would be the comparative case for the Ran to be able to bring a proof to Rabbeinu Tam. So that's one proof that the Ran is not talking about a situation where the guy, or not specifically talking about a situation where the guy took responsibility for the chametz. The second is that he explained in the case where it's Aser Darabanan, and that's going to be in, if I can find it, Dahatnan L'Kaman, right? So that's right after the big words Umihu, right? So that next line after that it says Had Tanan L'Kaman. We had the Mishnah later on that Avol Nachri Shehilvas Yisrael Chemsu Achar Pesach over. If the guy lent the Yisrael money and the Yisrael used his own chametz as the collateral, so after Pesach it's going to be Aser. Even though during Pesach it was in the house of the guy, that's what it's mashma, it's in his house. Over, we still say he's going to be over the Isser. So it's going to be Aser after Pesach, he's going to destroy it on a Durabanan level. Now, meaning it's only Durabanan, it's not D'Oraisa. Now what's the case? If the guy took achrayas, so then it doesn't work that Mishnah. The Mishnah where we quoted, Avol Nachri Shivlis Yisrael Chemso is over, because the Mishnah over there in the beginning of the Mishnah says that Shel Nachri, by the Yisrael, you're not over. If we're talking about a case where the lender is taking responsibility for the mashkon, so then in that case where it's the guy's chametz in the house of the Yisrael, if the Yisrael took achrayas, so then he would be chayiv. But the Mishnah says that he's not. So we see the Mishnah is not talking about a case where he took responsibility. He did not take achrayas. If so, then also that case that the Ran is speaking about, where it's the chametz of the Yisrael in the house of the guy, also he didn't take achrayas. The guy did not take achrayas. Nevertheless, there's no Isser D'Oraisa. So you see also from that case that the Ran is going to hold there's no Isser of Bal Yira Bal Yamatzeh if the chametz is the house of the guy, regardless of whether the guy himself takes responsibility for it. And the third proof that the Ran is makel in all situations, whether or not the guy took achrayas for it, is the last line of the Ran where he brought the opinion of the Rambam. And he says there's a machlokas between the Ramban and the Rambam. Now the Rambam didn't say anything about taking achrayas. Maybe the Rambam is only machmer if the guy did not take achrayas, in which case we don't have to say there's a machlokas between the Ramban and the Rambam. The fact that the Ran understands that it's a machlokas between the Ramban and the Rambam must imply that he holds that it doesn't make a difference whether you take achrayas or not. Because if we held that that's a difference, so then you can say that the Rambam is talking about where the guy did not take achrayas, that's why there's an Isser, and the Ramban is talking where he did take achrayas, that's why there's no Isser. We wouldn't have to make a machlokas between those two shitas. So there we have three proofs within the words of the Ran himself that he holds that the Ramban is completely makel. As long as the chametz is in the house of a guy, you're always going to be potter. It doesn't make a difference whether the guy has responsibility or not. Okay, so now we're going to deal with a question of how far we should go. I think we'll do at least the first two questions that we have on the Ran. So the first question we already saw was a question of Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah, he pointed out from the drashos of Goniv mi beis ha'ish to exclude mi beis hektish, and we know the halacha when it comes to Ganav doesn't really make a difference whose house you take it from. It makes a difference of who the owner is. So when it uses the word house, it really means ownership. So when we say that chametz is aser only if it's in your house, but not in the house of a guy, we really mean, right, it seems like we should really mean that it's only aser if it's in the ownership of a Yisrael and not in the ownership of a guy. But chametz, which is in the ownership of Yisrael, even if it's in the house of a guy, there should be an isser from the word batechem. That was the question of Rabbeinu Yonah. The answer of the Shagasari to this question is that we don't always darshan words the same in every single pasuk. Chazal has to look at the words that they're given and figure out which drasha makes sense according to the context. So when it comes to theft, so they were dorish that the word bayis over there means ownership. But when it comes to chametz, right, based on the fact that we have all these different words of gulecha and shalcha and beisecha and all these different words, so Chazal understood that beisecha in that pasuk means your actual house and not referring to ownership. Therefore, just because we have a drasha in one place of what house means doesn't mean that we have to darshan it the same way in the entire Torah. So that's how he answers the question of Rabbeinu Yonah. Second question that the Shagasari asks on the Shita of the Ran, Shita of the Ramban, Shita of the Gaonim, is from the Gemara of Safim Daf Mevav and Aleph, which we have quoted in the fourth Ma'ar Makom. The Mishnah there says, and this is a Mishnah we're very familiar with. Shagasari likes to quote this Mishnah in all of our discussions so far. How do you take off challah from a tamei dough on Pesach itself? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, lo trikol Hashem ad shetofa. You can't call it challah until you bake it. Because once you call it challah, you can't bake it because no one can eat it, and you can't bake on chametz for no reason. And you can't bake on Pesach, on Yontif, for no reason. Ben Basira Omer, tatel b'tzoni. Ben Basira says, put it in cold water, and that'll stop it from becoming chametz. Amar Yeshua, and Yeshua says, lo zehu chametz shemus haralav v'val Rabbi matzah. This type of chametz, you're not warned against from having on Pesach, because it doesn't belong to you. Elamafri shasa, you separate it, you call it chalu, when you chasad erev, you leave until the evening, it will become a chametz, but it's okay, you're not over an isser for that. And if it becomes chametz, it becomes chametz. And in the Gemara, there's a line there that says, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yeshua, Livarecha, according to what you're saying, Harehu over Mishum Bal Rabbi Yimatzi. It'll be over Bal Rabbi Yimatzi, because he holds that chametz, that challah that you separated, is considered yours. And I think we explained before, it's because of the concept of hoel. I could be sholam my netter and separate a different piece for challah. So therefore I do retain ownership over this piece of dough. And therefore, since I have ownership over the piece of dough, I'm going to be over the isser of Bal Rabbi Yimatzi. Ask the Shagasari, according to the Ran, what's the issue? Why should I have to be over this or Bal Rabbi Yimatzi? Let me just take this piece of challah that I separated, take it outside my house, stick it, in the Rosh Hashanah, or the house of a guy, or wherever it is, and I don't have to bake it on Yontif, and I won't be over this or Bal Rabbi Yimatzi. Why is Rabbi Eliezer so bothered by this that he says, no, you have to bake it? You have to bake it so it doesn't become chametz. What's the issue? And he even says, you can be over this or Bal Rabbi Yimatzi. You don't have to be over this, sir. Take it out of my house. So the answer, the Shagasari says, is that it's true, you could take it out of your house, and you would not be over this or Bal Rabbi Yimatzi, but as the Ran pointed out, if you own chametz, and it's not in your house, it's true that on a d'oraisa level you're not over any isser, but d'Rabbanan, you are over an isser. And therefore Rabbi Eliezer wants to, when we're figuring out what to do in this situation, don't do something where you're going to be over an isser d'Rabbanan. You have to do something where you're not over any isser. So therefore, it's not good enough for me to separate the challah, take it out of my house, and let it become chametz. I have to bake it so it doesn't become chametz. That's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, even though Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara said, according to you, Rabbi Yeshua, you're going to be over the isser by Rabbi Yimatz, which sounds like he's saying on a d'oraisa level, that's not because you can't fix it up in a way that you won't be over the isser, but if you follow Rabbi Yeshua, you will be over the isser d'oraisa, because Rabbi Yeshua says, I don't have to worry about it. So I don't have to worry about it, I don't have to take it out of my house. According to Yeshua, I will keep this chametz in my house. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you do that, you will be over this d'oraisa. Although it is true, or it could be true, according to the Ran, that you could just take it out of your house and you won't be over this d'oraisa. But that's not what Rabbi Yeshua would tell him to do, and therefore Rabbi Eliezer will tell him, Lidvarecha, according to you, you're going to be over this isser d'oraisa. Okay, so I think maybe now is a good stopping point. I mean, it's not a perfect stopping point because we're just going to go more questions on the Ran, more, but then we'll be way over time, and we won't have enough for a whole year for next week. So we'll stop here, and we'll continue Bezos Hashem next week.